I'm Algebra Annie, and I am here to help you be successful in your algebra class. It always seems impossible until it is done. Nelson Mandela. Our learning targets today are: I can identify and graph parallel and perpendicular lines. I can write equations to describe lines parallel or perpendicular to a given line.
So now we're going to do slopes of parallel and perpendicular lines. So all three of these lines are parallel. Visually, I can see that they all go in the same exact direction, and it looks as though they're always the same distance apart from one another. So the purple and the green line, I see that it is 3 spaces apart. If I keep going, I see that it is always 3 spaces apart. So it looks like the green and the purple line will always be the same distance apart. If they're always the same distance, that means they will always, even way up here or way down here, they will always be the same distance, which means they could never cross. Same with the green and blue. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is 7 across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I see that's also 7 across. If it is always 7 across, that means way up here if I'm comparing, or way down here if I'm comparing. If there's a distance of 7 between both the green and blue line every time, they will never intersect. So now let's take a look and see what that would mean in terms of their equations. So the purple line, it crossed through the y-intercept of 5, and I need to find my slope. So if I picked this nice pretty corner and I picked this nice pretty corner, I see that I went up 1 over 1. So my slope is up 1 over 1, which is 1. So for my purple line, I have y equals mx plus b. Y equals, my slope is 1x plus my b is 5. So my purple equation is this. Now let's go ahead and see if we can come up with the green line. My y-intercept is where I cross the y-axis. I see that it crosses at 2. But now I need my slope. So I need 2 perfect exact corners. There's 1 there and there's 1 there. So to get from this point to this point, I see that I went up 3 and then over 3. So up 3 and then over 3. This simplifies down to 1. So y equals mx plus b. My slope was 1x and my b was 2. So this is the equation for my green line. So now let's take a look at the blue line. My y-intercept is where I cross the y-axis. I see that it crosses at -5. My slope, how do I get from here to here? I went up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I went up 5 and over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Over 5. 5 over 5 simplifies down to 1. So y equals mx plus b is the equation of a line. M is 1, so I have 1x plus my b is a -5. So y equals 1x minus 5 is my equation of a line. So I know all 3 of these lines are parallel to one another. The purple line and the green line will always be the same distance apart, which means that they will never intersect. The green and the blue line will always be the same distance apart, which means they never intersect. What does that mean in terms of the line? Well, I've got these 3 equations. The only thing that I see that they all have in common is their slope. So we have noticed that parallel lines all have the same slope. So now we have these 3 lines, and I'm going to tell you that these are perpendicular. So what does it visually mean to be perpendicular? That means that where the lines intersect are going to be exact 90-degree corners, like a piece of paper edge. So the red and the purple are an exact paper corner, so they are 90 degrees. The red and the green are also an exact paper corner, so they're also 90 degrees. So on your paper, you could say that the red and green are perpendicular, so there's a perpendicular mark. The purple and red are perpendicular, so there is a perpendicular mark. Now let's take a look and see what this would mean in terms of the equation. So it looks like the green and the purple are both perpendicular to the red. So first we need to figure out our red line. I need my y-intercept. My y-intercept is -7. I need my slope. If I went from this exact corner to this exact corner, I went up 3 over 1, which simplifies down to 3. So y equals mx plus b is my equation of a line. Y equals, my m is 3x plus my b is a -7. So if you're simplifying this, it's y equals 3x minus 7 is the equation for the red line. Now since both the green and the purple are individually perpendicular to the red, let's see how those equations map out. So my green equation, I need the y-intercept. The y-intercept is -7. I need a slope. My slope, if I went from this exact pretty corner to this exact pretty corner, I see that I went down 1 and I went across 3. So this doesn't simplify at all. It's just negative 1 over 3. So y equals mx plus b is my equation of a line. So y equals, my slope is negative 1/3 x plus my b is negative 7. So y equals negative 1/3 x minus 7 is the equation of my green line. Let's see if we notice another pattern with our purple line. So my purple line, I needed the y-intercept. This crossed the y-axis right here at 3, so my y-intercept is 3. I need a slope. That's an exact pretty corner. This is also an exact pretty corner. So I went down 1 over 3. Down 1 over 3. Negative 1/3 does not simplify, so y equals mx plus b is the equation of a line. Y equals, my m is negative 1/3 x plus my b is 3. There's nothing to simplify, so that is my equation. Now we said the green was going to be perpendicular to the red. We also said the purple was perpendicular to the red. I notice that this slope is 3, and he's perpendicular to a negative 1 over 3. His slope is 3. He is perpendicular to a negative 1 over 3. These lines were perpendicular to the red line. I notice these slopes are the same. How do these slopes compare to the red? They are flipped, and they are opposite signs. So for lines to be perpendicular, you need opposite reciprocal slopes. So it's all about the slopes. So we have two different ways that the lines could be connected. They are either going to be parallel or they are going to be perpendicular. The double line is the sign for parallel. This 90-degree corner, because it's a 90-degree corner if it's perpendicular, is a symbol for perpendicular. Now if I gave you a line and I told you that the slope was 2 and I asked you to give me a parallel line. Parallel lines have same slopes, so you would have to give me a line that had the same exact slope. So your new slope would need to be 2. If I gave you a line that had a slope of 1/2 and I asked for a parallel line, parallel lines have the same slope. So if I gave you 1/2, you would need to give me a line with a slope of 1/2 as well. If I gave you a line that had a slope of 0 and I asked you for a parallel line, the slope of your line would also need to be 0 because they have same slopes. So parallel lines always have the same slope. Now how does this compare to perpendicular? If I gave you a line that had a slope of 1/2, perpendicular lines are opposites. So if this was a positive, your slope for the other one needs to be negative, and it needs to be reciprocal, which means you're flipping this. So instead of 1 over 2, it is 2 over 1, which simplifies down to a negative 2. If I gave you a line with a slope of positive 2, and I asked you to give me a perpendicular line, your slope would need to be opposite signs. So if he's positive, I need negative. Flip 2, you flip it and it gives you 1/2. If I give you a line with a slope of negative 3 over 4, and I ask for a perpendicular line, your slope would need to be opposites. So if he's negative, you need positive. Flip 3 over 4, and you get 4 over 3. So you have a positive 4 over 3. If I give you a line with a slope of 0, and I asked you for a perpendicular line, remember, a slope of 0 is, this is 0 fun. What would meet this as a 90-degree perfect corner like a piece of paper? It was the straight up and down undefined line, which means you would need to give me a line with an undefined slope, because perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. The only way to tell the difference between a parallel or perpendicular line is by their slopes. If their slopes are the same, the lines are parallel. If their slopes are opposite reciprocals, then they are perpendicular. So now we have to use what we know about parallel and perpendicular lines to see if we are able to identify a set of lines to be parallel. Now they want us to see which of these four are parallel to one another. Remembering the only difference is slopes. So let's look through all of these and see what their slopes are. This isn't a y equals form, so this must be the same format as y equals mx plus b. The number stuck to x, which is 4/3, is your slope. This is also a y equals form, so this is a y equals mx plus b form, but there is no x, which meant there's no mx part. If there is no mx, that meant your slope is 0. This is a y equals, so this is also in the form y equals mx plus b. We need the number stuck to x. The number stuck to x is our slope, so our slope is 4/3. This is also a y equals form, so this must be y equals mx plus b, but I have no x. If I have no x, that means I have no slope. If I have no slope, that meant my slope is 0. Now I wanted to know which lines are parallel. Parallel lines have the same slope. This line had a slope of 4/3. This line also had a slope of 4/3. So that meant that y equals 4/3 x plus 3 must be parallel to the line y equals 4/3 x minus 5, because they had the same slope. So this line and this line are parallel to one another. What about the other two lines? The other two lines have the same exact slope. They're both 0. So I know that these are also parallel to each other. So not only is this statement true, but I also know that y equals 2 is parallel to y equals -3, because these were also parallel to one another. So we have two answers. So we have 4 new equations, and they want us to see which of these are parallel. Again, the difference between parallel and perpendicular is all about slope. So we're going to take a look at these. This is a y equals. Since this is a y equals, it's y equals mx plus b, which means the number connected to the x, which is 3, is our slope. This also is a y equals, so this is a y equals mx plus b equation. Remembering the number connected to x, which is a -1/2, is going to be our slope. This is not a y equals form. This is also not in point slope form. So we got to make it be a y equals. So I'm going to subtract x from both sides. So I have 2y equals a -x minus 4. I'm going to divide everything by 2. So I have y equals a -1/2 x minus 2. Now that it is in y equals mx plus b form, the number stuck to x, which is the -1/2, is my slope. Now this looks like it's in point slope form. Y minus y1 equals m, and in parentheses x minus x1. It's in point slope form. The number in front of the parenthesis is the slope. Now if the slopes are the same, they're parallel. This has a slope of 3, and this has a slope of 3. So we know that this line and this line are parallel to one another because they both have the same slope of 3. These two lines both have a slope of -1/2, so we know that these two lines are actually parallel to one another. So you have two sets of parallel lines. So how would you write your final answer? This line of y equals 3x plus 2 was parallel to his partner was the y minus 5 equals 3, and in parentheses x minus 1. Those two were parallel. And then you also said that y equals a -1/2 x plus 4 was parallel to x plus 2y equals -4. That was set number 2. So this is your final answer, and you're done. So now they're asking us to identify which lines are perpendicular to one another. So they gave us 4 different lines they want us to decide which are perpendicular to each other. And if you remember, perpendicular is all about the slopes. So we got to find the slope of all of them. The only way to be an x equals equation is if you cut straight through the x-axis. If you cut straight through the x-axis, that meant that you were an undefined line. So my slope is undefined for this one. This is a y equals, which meant that it was a y equals mx plus b equation. There is no x, so there is no m. There is no m, then your slope is 0. This is a y equals equation, so this is y equals mx plus b. The number stuck to x is our slope, so our slope is a -4. So this appears to be in point slope form, where this is point slope form. The number stuck in front of the parenthesis is our slope, so our slope is 1/4. So to be perpendicular, I need opposites, and they need to be reciprocals. So this is a -4, this is a positive, and flip the 4, you get 1/4. So these two are perpendicular to one another. And then if you're a straight up and down line, the only way to be perpendicular is if you had a slope of this is 0 fun. So these two are also perpendicular to one another. So how would you write your final answer? You would say that x equals -2 is perpendicular to y equals 1. That's set number 1. You would also say that y equals -4x is perpendicular to y plus 2 is equal to 1/4 times the parenthesis of x plus 1. So those two lines are also perpendicular. So now we're going to learn how to write equations that are perpendicular and parallel to one another. So this problem is full of lots of information. First, they want our answer to be in slope-intercept form, which means our final answer needs to be in a y equals mx plus b form. They want us to use this point. So this is our x1, y1 coordinate point that we need to use. And then it needs to be parallel. If it's parallel, then I know that I need the same slope. And this is the equation it needs to be parallel to. So they give us a point. They gave us the point 4, 5. And I need to figure out what slope to use. So our old slope was what? They gave us this equation. Our old slope is the number in front of x, so our old slope is 5. I need to figure out what my new slope is. So my new slope, I asked for a parallel line, so my new slope needs to be the same slope. And if it's going to be the same, that means I also need it in 5. So I have a point and I have a slope. So this is the slope I'm using because it's the same slope because they asked for a parallel line. And this is the point they told us to use. So since I have a point and a slope, we're going to use point-slope form. So y minus y1 equals m, and in parentheses, x minus x1. So I have y minus my y1. Well, here is my x, y coordinate point. My y1 was 5. Equals, m is my slope is 5, x minus the x point they gave me was 4. Now I need to remember I needed slope-intercept form. So this is point slope. I need to distribute. So I have y minus 5 equaling 5x minus 20. Add 5 to each side. And I have y to equal 5x minus 15. And this is my final answer. I needed parallel. The slope is the same, so it is parallel. And I used that point, so I know that it goes through that exact point they told me to use. So our next equation, they want an equation in slope-intercept form that uses this point and is perpendicular to this line. So this problem gives us a lot of information. First, our final answer needs to be in slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b is in slope-intercept form, so that's the final form I need. They tell me what point to use. So this is my x1, y1 coordinate point that I'll be using. They want perpendicular. Remembering perpendicular slopes are opposite reciprocals. And what line is he supposed to be perpendicular to? He's supposed to be perpendicular to this line. So they gave us a point. They told us to use the point 3, 2. This is the x point. This is the y point. So I have an xy coordinate point. But now I have to figure out a slope. They gave me an old slope. So the slope of the line they gave me was 3. I needed a new slope. Now what kind of slope did I actually need? They told me that I needed an opposite reciprocal slope. So if the old was 3 and I need opposite, positive, negative, now I need to reciprocal. So if he's 3, I need 1 over 3. So this is going to be my new slope. And they gave me a point that I need to use. Since I have a slope and a point, I'm going to use point-slope form. So y minus y1 equals m, and in parentheses, x minus x1. So y minus the y they gave me was 2, equals my slope is a negative 1/3, and x minus the x they gave me is 3. I need my final answer to be in y equals form. So that means I need to distribute the negative 1/3. So I have negative 1/3 x, a negative 1/3 times a negative 3 is a positive 1. Need to add 2 to each side. I get y to equal a negative 1/3 x plus 3. And this is going to be my perpendicular line. Slopes are opposite reciprocals, and I used this point, so that goes through that point.
What did we learn today? I can identify and graph parallel and perpendicular lines. I can write equations to describe lines, parallel or perpendicular to a given line. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow in class.